Hello and welcome to the Bridging Borders Project. I'm Hannah Hundle and I'm joined by my co-host, Saira Jagopal. And today we're bringing you an interview with the First Lady of Iceland, Eliza Reid.
This is a special interview for me because First Lady Reid is actually Canadian Icelandic. As a Canadian myself, I really appreciate the ways that the First Lady has stitched together her multinational identity and forged a path as a strong advocate for social issues affecting Canada, Iceland, and the world. We'll be diving into these social issues today in our conversation with her, as well as getting some updates on how Iceland is navigating through the COVID-19 pandemic. Here now is Her Excellency Eliza Reid.
So I wanted to begin by talking to you about how you view your role as First Lady. I know it's a topic you've written extensively about, most recently in the New York Times, about defining the space for yourself in a role that leaves so much undefined. So talk to me a bit about how you're beginning to carve out this space for yourself, and what do you view as your role in terms of Icelandic governance and global governance?
That's a really good question, Hannah. And, I've spent a lot of time thinking about it because, of course, there's no handbook for how to be a first lady in this world. And in some ways, there are often some sort of outdated expectations surrounding it. But obviously, first and foremost, it's an incredible privilege and an incredible honor to be able to serve my country in this way. And I enjoy it every single day. And I suppose the way in which I'm trying to shape the role mostly is to maybe confound expectations a little bit about what the, say, a female spouse of a head of state may be expected to do, and also to use my voice. So I'm not really seen as a sort of accessory to my husband, but to somebody with my own opinion and voices. In the context of governments, as you say, obviously, I'm not in any kind of elected position. And my husband is the president of Iceland, is the head of state, but not the head of government. That role falls to the prime minister. So his role is really kind of as a unifying figure. And I have, I suppose, a public sphere that in Iceland able to talk about things and share things, but not in a sort of political way. But to me, issues like having women's voices heard and gender equality aren't political issues, they're human rights issues. And so I really try to speak a lot. I'm also an immigrant in Iceland. I was born and raised in Canada, and I moved to Iceland as an adult. And so I think it's very important as well to show people that even though I speak Icelandic with an accent or I speak it imperfectly, that I still have just as much of a right to have my voice heard.
Your Excellency, I actually wanted to follow up a little bit. So I'm also from Canada, and I want to know, how did you stay close to your roots? And how do you bring a little bit of Canada with you to Iceland? The reason I ask this, not just from the context of a foreigner, but how are you bringing this Canadian spirit to the context of global governance, especially in a time when transatlantic governance seems to be falling through the cracks?
Well, I think that, Canada is kind of an internationalist country. It's a country that overall has an interest in global affairs and its role in the global stage. And I think Iceland as well. Iceland obviously is a much smaller population, but we like to be leaders in areas like gender equality, in areas like climate change, where we feel that we can have an effect. And I think growing up in Canada and Iceland, both countries have a similar population density. They have a relatively small population for the size of their land space. And countries that have challenging natural environments sometimes, in Canada, it can be cold in winter and there's forest fires. And Iceland is obviously a volcanic island and there's been eruptions. And I think in both countries, people know how to come together when there are difficult situations and to know that kind of nature rules and we have to respect that. And I suppose I'm generalizing here, but I think, Canadians are a kind of friendly, open-minded people, broadly speaking, open-minded, societies into different ideas. And Iceland is also that way. So I've really enjoyed making my home here in Iceland as well. I've always felt like I belonged here.
And I wanted to follow up a little bit more. In terms of education, you've also been all over the world. You've studied in Canada, you also were studying in the UK, and of course, you're quite well known in Iceland. I wanted to know, how do you maintain this incredible triangle of Canada, mainland continental Europe, the island, and also Iceland? How do you kind of bring that all into your ideas of global governance, and how do you think about strengthening these diplomatic ties?
Well, the world is just becoming a smaller place. And I think we are all realizing that when either global governments, discussions, any type of organization, and not even politics or governments, but the more voices, the more diversity that can be heard in those discussions, the more effective and broad-minded our solutions are going to be. So, as you say, I have this background growing up in Canada. I spent several years in the UK and went to graduate school there, met my Icelandic husband there, and then have really lived most of my adult life in Iceland. And I also enjoy traveling very much. So I think the more that we can extend our networks to various cultures and experiences and backgrounds, the more that we can learn from each other. And thank goodness for all the revolutions in technology that are allowing us to do that. I mean, even under the current challenging circumstances worldwide, we're still able to communicate with each other, across time zones and borders and countries.
Yes, yes. You mentioned the challenging circumstances worldwide. And of course, that's a reference to the coronavirus pandemic, which Iceland is also dealing with right now. Can you paint a picture of how Iceland has handled this crisis? What is the severity like and what is the death toll? Because by current indications, it appears that Iceland is emerging on the better side of this pandemic.
Mm-hmm. We have, very thankfully, I think we have this group of people where right when it seemed like there was going to be a crisis that started, people were talking about it. The emergency committee began meeting even in January before there were any cases. The first recognized case in Iceland was at the end of February. And since about the middle of March, 3 people until Monday this week have been holding daily press conferences. They are the chief medical officer and the chief epidemiologist and the chief police officer in charge of the situation. So immediately from the outset, attention was deferred to the scientists who are managing this thing, who and the trust that exists between the population and our society and between the scientists who are there. And the government, they have been responding in terms of packages and what they're doing, but really listening to the scientific advice. And the population as a whole also follow that advice. So we have never had to go under extremely strict lockdowns. There weren't fines, but we our schools were open, for example, the primary schools and the preschools at least, for a limited time and with a lot of social distancing. And as of Monday this week, the official state of emergency has been lifted, and gradually the society is gradually and slowly but surely opening up. So now, as of the end of May, groups of up to 200 people can gather. People can be closer together as long as there are provisions for people who want to have social distancing. Most gyms and swimming pools are open, but at a limited capacity. Restaurants are open. So everything is kind of gradually going back. And every day at the same time, they publish the number of cases. So currently there are 3 active cases of COVID-19 in the country, and about 900 people who are sort of officially in isolation, and then that gets updated overall. But we have very regular testing, and Iceland has by far the highest number of testing per 1,000 people in the world.
Yes, yes. And with regard to testing, I had actually learned that Iceland tested 16% of the population by the end of May, which is remarkable. Will these robust testing procedures be continuing? And if so, how long for?
I don't know how long for. I know that it's been working in cooperation with a private company. So if you had symptoms, if you were exposed, or there was a reason to think that you might test positive for COVID-19, that went through one channel through the hospital healthcare system, and then this private company was working to also kind of do research to see how prevalent it was in society, so that people could go and sign up, even if you were asymptomatic or you hadn't had any exposure. And then cases were coming up that way, but very few, much fewer than 1%, but that indicate that it still exists in the society, but there's really extensive sort of track and trace measures in place. So when those people test positive, then the people that they've been exposed to in the last 2 weeks, they all go into quarantine. And many people have downloaded an app on their phones that kind of let you trace where people have been, that makes it easier to test that. So there's been really extensive tracking and tracing, and that's what we're hoping will also help when the borders open a little bit after June the 15th, which is the plan at the moment.
So, Your Excellency, when the borders opened, we were curious. So much of Iceland is beautiful, and a lot of it depends on tourism. So we want to know, number 1, how are you planning to keep people safe? And number two, how are you planning to help those citizens who work in the tourism industry and who may be impacted by the lower number of tourists coming into the country?
Yeah, I mean, of course, tourism is the number one contributor to Iceland's GDP. So it's had a huge, huge impact. One of the big things that had started happening now, because we haven't been maybe under quite the same restrictions, is there's been a huge campaign and an effort for Icelanders to travel within our own country. So and obviously we're not traveling abroad at the moment either. So we are really trying to travel around and experience our own country and eat in restaurants and get activities and stay in hotels and patronize these organizations that have less business from abroad. Obviously, the most important thing when the country opens up is to make sure that process is done in a safe way for everyone. So, and that process is constantly being examined. So even though one thing has been announced now, if for some reason there was a huge outbreak before, then of course they would be reassessing things. But at the moment, from the 15th of June when it opens up, people will be able to arrive and should be able to be tested upon arrival if they can't prove that they've had a recent negative test, and need to, obviously, to self-quarantine until the test comes back, which should take about 5 or 6 hours. And then if they test negative, then they can travel around the country. So I think we're also hoping as well that, I think this reminds people that that Iceland is here, and a lot of people, it's not a feasible proposition to be traveling right away, but when things start to recover and people start to travel again, then people might think Iceland, there's a lot of space here, not a lot of crowds, not cramped public transportation and dirty air and huge events, and this might be a good place to go where you could voluntarily, it's quite easy to practice social distancing in any case.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been a threading theme throughout this conversation, globalized responses to globalized crises. And obviously, it's such a difficult time for so many people, not only in Iceland, but also around the world. So to end on a forward-looking note, could you offer any words of hope or inspiration about how we as a people might emerge from this crisis a better world for it?
That's a very good question, and a nice final question. I think obviously this crisis, as you say, has affected all of us around the world. Within that somehow brings us all together, it reminds us all that we're all living on the same planet. And I think hopefully it helps us maybe to remind each other, maybe we look a little bit about what's important, to think out for each other, to be kind to each other, sensitive to each other. And for those of us maybe who are in the position to be able to help each other, people who are in less fortunate circumstances for whatever reason. I'm very cognizant, for instance, of the fact that, for some people, maybe they've enjoyed spending more time at home with their families, but for many people, being at home is not a safe situation. And I think the more that we can help via organizations or other people, checking in on people who we think are alone, and just being aware of our fellow human beings, hopefully we can, come out of this having learned something. And I know we will. The human race does that. We develop all kinds of things that forward, and I know we continue to do that.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. It was wonderful to speak with you today about a wide range of issues, including Iceland's response to the coronavirus pandemic. We're really grateful for your time.
Yes, thank you so much, Your Excellency. We really appreciate you joining us today.